Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. The drive towards war against Syria is unmistakable. The pretext is still another alleged chemical attack. As usual, no evidence is presented. As usual, conclusions are drawn before an independent investigation. But this time, there's a difference. Syria can defend itself and it has powerful allies. We live in very dangerous times. CrossTalking Syria, I'm joined by my guest, Joe Lauria in Washington. He's the editor-in-chief of ConsortiumNews.com and author of How I Lost by Hillary Clinton, with the foreword by Julian Assange. Also in Washington, we have Michael Maloof. He is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense. And in New York, we have Richard Murphy. He is a former U.S. career ambassador to Syria and currently an adjunct scholar at the Middle East Institute. All right, CrossTalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Let me go to Joe first in Washington. It seems to me that, we have as president somebody very different than ran as president. As little as a week ago, Donald Trump made a very public announcement that we'd be withdrawing from Syria. Fast forward up to the last few days or so, it looks like he's being forced to stay there, even if he doesn't want to stay there. We have an entire chorus of the media driving for war. The deep state is on board, of course. John Bolton is in place, and I have to make one exception. At least Tucker Carlson over at Fox at least decided to express his dissent here. Where are we, Joe? Where does this all stand? Go ahead.
Well, the fact that he wanted to withdraw from Syria makes it even less likely that the Syrian government was behind this attack. We are seeing what we've seen for a long, long time, a pattern of deception by the U.S. government, depending on who the enemy of the day is. If you want to go to war against Spain, they blew up the Maine. The North Vietnamese attacked a ship in the Gulf of Tonkin. Saddam had WMD. Russia invaded Ukraine, shot down a Malaysian airline, stole an election, tried to kill a former double agent in Britain, and now is somehow implicated in this chemical attack. This is what governments do. But there are also two other parties besides government. There's the press and the people. So governments lie, all governments lie, some worse than others, but the press's job is supposed to filter that and defend the public against government lies. But we see now a press that's completely obsessed with its own fame, with its careerism, with living through vicarious power of government, and they are letting the public down so that these these conclusions before investigations begin, as you pointed out at the beginning, are being let to stand. And this is, as you also said, very, very dangerous right now.
Richard, is on the table now full regime change by use of military force? Do you think that's in the cards right now? Go ahead, Richard in New York.
I see no evidence that the administration has gone back to a position that you could say was early Obama, that it was time for Assad to step aside. I think this administration has reconciled itself that Assad is president and is likely to stay for a while. Okay,
well, Michael, but that doesn't really square with what we've heard over the last few days here. We have, Nikki Haley going off the rail. I mean, I thought Samantha Power was had wandered off the reservation, but Nikki Haley takes the cake there. And then we also, and I'm glad Joe mentioned it, we really have the drums of war in the media. It seems to me that they really want to box Trump in. If he does nothing, then he's bluster. If he does something, it's against international law, and it may be the law of unintended consequences. By getting involved in this war, you never know. Because if you look over the last 18 years, these military adventures never end the way they expect. Go ahead, Michael.
No, I think you're right. I think that even though President Trump wanted to get out, I think that other people who are surrounding him are much more determined that he stay, and actually, the fact that John Bolton is now the National Security Advisor, who was the fellow who really wanted us to go into Iraq on the premise that there was WMD. I think that the administration is slowly turning toward regime change again. I think that that's what they're going to go after. And the whole idea, I think, as far as a strategic policy, if there is one, for the United States ultimately is to divide Syria.
Yeah, well, that's been, that's you can throw in the Turkish angle, which of course is a completely different program, but, it looks like a partition is really what they're going to settle on here. Joe, the interesting thing is that, I've never believed that anybody in the U.S. government, politicians, think tankers and all of that, they don't give a hoot about the Syrian people. They never have. And what I see now is this is a geopolitical gambit here. We've noticed that Russia is being held responsible for this alleged chemical attack, which there is no evidence presented to the public, which I guess the public is just getting used to it, a evidence-free foreign policy to go to war. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I don't think they care very much about the American public either, let alone the Syrians. I mean, this is another attempt to drag Russia into this, and Russia, we have no idea why. Or even if there was a chemical attack, that hasn't even begun the investigation. We hear Nikki Haley saying we need an investigation, but on one side of her mouth and the other side of the mouth, Syria did it and Russia was behind it. This is really, really not a safe situation, as you pointed out. I do think that they noticed that Russian-backed Syrian government was winning this war. It was practically over. The suburbs of Damascus, Ghouta, had been a thorn in the side of the Syrian government since the very beginning of this conflict 5 years ago. It was really a last stronghold after Aleppo and Idlib. So I think that is a realization in the capitals of Riyadh and in Ankara and certainly in Washington, that this was and by the rebels themselves, this was the last chance if they were going to try to reverse this tide. So the rebels needed to bring the U.S. into it, which is why it seems like they may very well have been behind, and Russia, by the way, behind this attack. And Russia warned, by the way, 3 weeks ago that this could happen, that there was a false flag, a chemical attack in the works. I don't know if that's what happened, but I certainly don't know that the Syrian government did it, but that doesn't seem to matter to people like Nikki Haley. Syria did it, and now we're going to see an attempt, maybe by the United States, to get deeply involved in this, to reverse the tide, and this is their last chance before the Syrian government wins this war, which they are on the verge of doing.
Richard, what national interest does Syria hold? Because, I mean, when Trump came in almost exactly a year ago, there was an alleged chemical incident, and then he ordered a Tomahawk a strike against Syria. No evidence. We know now, Secretary Mattis came out and said, well, we don't have any evidence there ever was a chemical attack perpetrated by the Syrian government. I mean, what is wrong with these people? I mean, a year ago, an attack was made illegally against the country's sovereignty here, and now this is like rerunning this bad film. I mean, why? Syria has never attacked the United States. It is not a threat to American national interest, and now we're on the verge of going to war. Congress doesn't even get involved. It abrogates its responsibility to war making. I mean, why is Syria so important for the United States to get involved militarily? Please, Richard in New York.
Start with its geographic position. It is in a key area, and the policies it has followed over the last few years of opening the doors to Iran to establish an increasing militia presence.
But Richard, isn't that the sovereign right? Isn't that the sovereign right of a state? Can't Syria have friends of its own choosing? Why does the United States determine what countries can have friends with whom? Why? Go ahead, Richard.
Well, come on. It's not just a matter of smiling at each other and having friends. They are actively assisting the government of Iran in creating a corridor across Iraq, Syria to Hezbollah in Lebanon with the aim of mounting pressure on the Israelis. And that has to catch American attention.
Okay, that's really interesting. Let me go to Michael here, because some sovereignty is more important than others. Okay, I mean, Syria should have the legal sovereign right to make whatever friends it wants. Okay, the United States does that all the time. Okay, and nobody says anything about it. And let me go to Michael. Israel's right on the border. They're one of the largest militaries in the world, most powerful, and it has never lifted one finger to fight terrorism in Syria. Actually, just the opposite. It's aided and abetted groups, okay? So, I mean, worried about Israel's concerns. Israel's part of the problem here. And I think, and Saudi Arabia is part of the problem here. Two key allies of the United States. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, you hit right on it at the end there. This is flowing out of a deal that between the Saudis and the Israelis, and again the Saudis actually are pouring millions of dollars into the Sunni-controlled areas as well as into Lebanon because they see a potential for Iran absolutely capturing them as far as the influence is concerned, and the Saudis are absolutely against that. And you have the Israelis who are trying to help that, and they see the forward movement of the Iranians as a direct threat to them, and as a consequence, I wouldn't doubt that the Israelis could initiate an attack on Lebanon almost any time.
Sure.
And I know people in Lebanon that I talk to are very concerned about that.
Joe, weigh in on that there, because is this policy being driven by Tel Aviv and Riyadh?
Well, certainly Riyadh and other Gulf states from the very beginning, and Turkey wanted the overthrow of Assad. And that brings me to the point that whether you agree or like the Assad government or not, it's a fact that they have been on the defensive. This is an uprising. This was an attempt to overthrow a government. So you're on the defensive. So to invite Iran in and Russia to help them defend themselves is a natural act of a government trying to survive. This was not Iran or Russia invading Syria. The Iranians wouldn't have come in if there were no attempt to overthrow the government. So they had every right, as you pointed out, to invite whoever any friends they had to help them survive. This is natural, and any government would do that. Now, the Israelis, I mean, Hezbollah, by the way, I think is defending Lebanon. Even Lebanese Christians and Sunnis would agree with, as much as they may hate that. Well, they may not like them, but they realize that the Lebanese army isn't worth
Joe,
a damn.
let me jump in here. Let me jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Syria. Stay with our team. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the situation in Syria. Okay, let me go back to Richard in New York. Richard, I know you're a career diplomat, and diplomacy is sorely lacking these days around the world. But Richard, what a military strike against the Assad government in Damascus? What kind of what outcome would Washington be looking for in striking Syria? You've said that they've backed away from regime change. I think that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. I think they would want to go all the way. I mean, what kind of behavior is it you're trying to enact here? I mean, this is the problem with military policy, because it doesn't really work with political outcomes. It has certain goals of destruction and threatening. It doesn't really talk about the political part of it. Go ahead, Richard in New York.
Well, we certainly do need a clearer overall policy towards Syria. The strategy has been wanting, to put it mildly. Now, the question, though, what are we trying to accomplish by staying in? Why were 2,000, a very small number, there in northeastern Syria? We don't think, first of all, we don't think that the ISIS effort is totally ended. And we also know there are other groups ready to come in its wake if given the least opportunity. So what's needed is a strategy which develops the country as a whole as quickly as possible, involves the people with their own government as quickly as possible. After these years of warfare and massive killings and dislocations, it's not going to come easily, it's not going to come quickly. But one thing we can contribute at the moment is the continued small military presence in the country, with ISIS very much at the top of our concerns.
Well, Richard, just the opposite is probably the truth. I mean, the U.S. maintaining its forces in Syria probably gives ISIS a reason to exist, to fight a foreign occupier. Number two, Richard, the U.S. government has already warned it will sanction third parties and countries that help Syria with its reconstruction. So getting all the people together and helping developing the country, that's already off the table. You'll be sanctioned. Okay, Michael, I can see you wanted to jump in there. Go ahead.
No, it's out.
Yeah, this once again gets back to the whole point as to why U.S. forces are remaining in the Sunni-controlled area of eastern Syria, looking for bases, actually, that the Turks have complained about in the Kurdish-controlled area. The whole idea is, I think, by the United States, if it's trying to resurrect a strategic policy of any kind, is to unite the Sunnis of East Syria with western Iraq, and to maintain that presence there and control that area and basically partition Syria ultimately. Even though you have a little pocket of ISIS, but the United States is supporting entities and groups, militant groups still, such as Jaish al-Islam, which was in East Ghouta and has a capability, by the way, of launching chlorine gas and other weapons of mass destruction. They have actually admitted that in the past, up in Aleppo earlier this year. So the United States is going to continue to support these Sunni-controlled groups, and I think ultimately it is to divide Syria, and with the help of the Saudis. The Saudis are paying for this, or they've offered money, and I think Trump may take it. That may be the only reason why he has decided not to pull out, because he got a good deal.
Michael, isn't it really wonderful that the U.S. government pimps out the American military for a foreign power? What a disgrace! What a real disgrace! You know,
we're turning into mercenaries.
For the men and women
for
the people that work in the military to be pimped out by their own president, to have some Wahhabi crazy regime in Saudi Arabia pay you. You wrap your head around that. Okay, that's amazing. Okay, let me go to Joe here. I think Joe,
it's happening.
It's happening. Let me go to Joe here. What is happening to me is that there's such an uproar in the United States because of Russia, and this disease has transported itself across the Atlantic into Britain right now over another chemical weapons incident, which we see no evidence of whatsoever, just supposed to believe it. But Joe, they want to give Russia a bloody nose. They want to give Russia a bloody nose in Syria. The Russians have already made it very clear that they will not take those threats lightly, okay? That's why I'm very, very concerned. Go ahead, Joe.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Now, we have to understand that it's a fiction that the United States was fighting ISIS in Syria. I believe they were fighting them in Iraq. I think there were two separate wars. We know from this Defense Intelligence Agency document from 2012 that the U.S. and its partners in the region and in Europe wanted to establish a Salafist principality, which later became ISIS. It was warned about that. Then we know from a John Kerry leaked audio that he was watching, he says we were watching ISIS advance on Damascus to try to get Assad to leave, exactly what that document had said, that to put pressure on ISIS. So there is no effort to defeat ISIS. Russia has defeated, with Syria, and Iran and Shia militias have defeated ISIS in Syria. They're not there for that reason. And we have to remember also, from the campaign of Donald Trump, he wanted to cooperate with Russia in Syria. And so let's worry about the form of government later on, whether Assad stays or not. The real problem was ISIS. So I think he had, I don't know who told him that, whether it was Bannon or whatever, or he just got a brilliant idea one morning, but that was the right policy that even Obama tried to implement, if you recall. He had Kerry try to work out a cooperation with Russia that Putin had called for.
Yeah, and Ash Carter destroyed, spoiled the party. Again, let me, even when there is a legitimate or quasi-legitimate diplomatic attempt that it's destroyed by these hawks in the military. Keep going, Joe.
And now, Peter. Yeah, and now, Peter, he wanted to withdraw the troops. If you read a piece in the New Yorker by Robin Wright, the generals were the ones who were supposed to be running the show, not the president. We have a civilian form of government here, not the generals. So, again, Trump's instincts are to say the right thing, but he's pulled back by those behind him. And this attack coming very fortuitously when he was about to withdraw the troops, looks like the opposite's going to happen.
Richard, why is the United States threatening the Damascus government when Damascus has been doing the heavy lifting to fight ISIS? And what the United States does every time it goes in there militarily, has its forces on the ground, it just dullens that attempt to fight terrorism. The U.S. policy is an impediment to fighting ISIS. I don't understand the logic here. Go ahead, Richard, in New York.
I flatly disagree with your assumption about at least the consistency of Syrian policy to fight ISIS.
What has the U.S. done in Syria
using
that's
ISIS
right?
For its own purposes.
Name one thing the United States has done right when it comes to Syria? One thing.
Well, we tried for many, many years to get Syria interested in opening up talks with the Israelis, and they were very, very reluctant to come anywhere near that situation.
Why?
Half as al-Assad did in his last years.
Okay, I have no idea what that's supposed to mean. After 7 years of civil war, a proxy international war, it's because Assad didn't want to talk to the Israelis? Really?
No, don't misinterpret. I'm just saying that we have tried to do something positive in Syria. We did work on it extensively, year after year, didn't get anywhere. Okay, so that's passed. But it didn't leave a very good impression of Syria in Washington, I can tell you.
Well, I think
what they can do now,
you know, the Syrian people, after all of the
UN,
after the billions of dollars, the training, the funding, the salarying of these jihadists from outside the country, that's what the U.S. policy has been. And now they are illegally present there, illegally under international law. The Damascus government wants them out, and they won't leave. I mean, who's breaking the law here? Who's being an animal here, okay? This war could have ended a long time ago if it hadn't been backed by the United States, Saudi Arabia, the other Gulf countries, and Israel. It would have been over a long time ago. Go ahead, Michael. Do you want to jump in?
It could have been over a long time ago if they hadn't piled in and beaten up those kids down in Daraa.
Okay,
and
on the first, and Richard, on the first day of the protest, there were violence, and it was from outsiders. This is very well documented. You know, don't tell me, you know, this is all peaceniks, you know, wandering around, you know, giving flowers to people, because that violence started on day one. Okay, Michael, you wanted to jump in.
Our relationship with the CIA, with Syria actually degraded in 2003 when we invaded Iraq. The Syrians saw that this was going to happen. They had the back channel with the CIA.
They helped.
And when
helped
that was severed,
they helped.
But to a point, they did. And then that's when they turned to the Pentagon just on the eve of the invasion to say, don't invade. We'll try to work this out. We'll even stage some 5,000 troops to go into Iraq for you to look for WMD. They saw what the outcome will be. So and everything went to pieces from them. That's when Assad really turned to Iran. Right after that. And that cannot be disputed. That is a fact. And I think that's when Iran and Syria really began to become closer. You got to keep in mind, Assad is a Shiite Alawite, so that was normal. And this is what upset Israel to a great extent. Our foreign policy in the United States has been to help implement Israel's foreign policy for years, and the Pentagon was the instrument for doing that.
Okay, Joe, 40 seconds. You end the program. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, well, John Bolton began this week his new job as National Security Advisor. He has a real thing for Iran. The Iranian presence in Syria might be what he ultimately be going after, even more than trying to overthrow Assad.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, it looks to me like always it's Iran. Always is at the very, very center. It has been since the revolution in 1979. And Trump, and he has surrounded him with a group of people that feel exactly the same way. People that lament the defeat in Vietnam. That's all the time we have, gentlemen. Many thanks to my guests in Washington and in New York. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, CrossTalk rules.